Hello, my name is Brian Foss. I'm the Planning Director for Nevada County, and this is a recorded scoping meeting for the preparation of an environmental impact report for the Rise Grass Valley, Idaho, Maryland mine project. The purpose of this meeting is to solicit and receive comments on the project that will help scope the purpose of the EIR. A notice of preparation, or NOP, has been completed, which means that an environmental impact report will be prepared to analyze the potential impacts on the environment of the proposed project. CEQA, or the California Environmental Quality Act, requires that environmental impacts be analyzed for a proposed project in a variety of areas, including biological resources, noise, potential noise impacts, traffic impacts, water resources, geotechnical, and a number of other issue areas. These issue areas will be addressed as part of the standard process of an EIR preparation. However, the scoping meeting is held to receive comments from agencies and interested members of the public on specific issues that should be studied and addressed as part of the environmental analysis and included in the environmental impact report. The scoping meeting is not intended to provide any answers on how the project may impact the environment or whether or not the project will be approved. It is intended to gather information so that a complete and thorough environmental analysis through an environmental impact report can be completed. The scoping period will last 30 days. It began on July 17th, and during that time, comments can be submitted to the county to be included in the environmental impact report analysis. The county has hired a team of consultants to review the project application and the technical studies that have been prepared as part of the application, and they will provide an independent review and analysis and complete an environmental impact report to be forwarded to decision makers for a final determination on the project. I will introduce the project planner first, Matt Kelly, with the county, and he will give an overview of the project description and a little bit of the process. And then he will turn it over to Rainey Planning and Management, who is the team of EIR consultants that the county has hired to prepare the independent analysis of the project's impacts on the environment and prepare a complete environmental impact report. So with that, I'll turn it over to Matt Kelly, Senior Planner.
Thank you very much, Brian. This is Matt Kelly, Senior Planner with the Nevada County Planning Department. Wanted to introduce the project. The proposed project is a underground gold mine project. It was submitted by Rise Gold, and the application is for a use permit with a reclamation plan, and then a number of other entitlements. The proposed project, next slide, please. So the proposed project would include two sites. The first is the Brunswick site, and then the second is the Centennial Site. So this map shows an overview of the two sites. Both sites, both subsurface sites, incorporate about 175.34 acres. The Brunswick site on the lower portion of the map shows the actual main mine location, with the Centennial Site being the tailings depository, which would be accessible down Brunswick Road to Whispering Pines, would be the haul route as proposed. The project does also include a subsurface estate that's outlined in the dashed orange area. That's about 2,500 acres. This is owned by the applicant, and it would allow for the applicant to reinitialize underground gold mining for the Idaho, Maryland mine within the subsurface estate area only. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the location of the proposed project. This is the Brunswick industrial site. The site is developed currently with an existing Brunswick shaft or concrete silo that accesses the underground Idaho, Maryland mine as it exists today. The project would utilize this structure to be able to access the underground mine workings. In addition, the applicant proposes to construct an additional shaft on this parcel to be able to provide additional accessibility to the project and below ground. All of the mine gold processing would be done on this site, with the haul route being to the Centennial Site from Brunswick Road to Whispering Pines to be able to access the Centennial Site. Next slide, please. This map shows the Centennial Site. This would be the tailings depository and storage for the proposed project. Access, as I said earlier, would come down Brunswick Road to Whispering Pines Lane, and then the applicant would develop this site. This is the historic depository for the existing underground Idaho, Maryland mine, as it was operated previously. So the project does include a number of entitlements, the first being certification of the EIR and an adoption of the mitigation monitoring and reporting program. Then next would be the project includes a use permit with a reclamation plan and a financial assurance cost estimate, which is required by SMARA, or the Surface and Mining Reclamation Act. The project does also include a rezone. The rezone is to rezone the subject parcel, the Brunswick site, from M1, which is light industrial, with SP, which is site performance, to M1 ME. The ME is needed as a combining district to be able to add the mining operation and the mining use to the M1 zoning district. The project also does include a variance. The variance is required because several structures will exceed the height limitation of the M1 zoning district of 45 feet, with the highest being 165 feet. That would be the main head frame and access point to the underground mine, which would be newly constructed. The project does also include a number of management plan components, the first being management plan for reduced setbacks within 100-foot high water mark of existing perennial streams, as well as wetlands and riparian areas, and then also from the 50-foot high water mark of existing intermittent streams, as well as a management plan component to allow development within a seismic hazard zone, which is located on the Brunswick industrial site. There is an existing underground earthquake fault line that would be proposed to be developed within it. And so management plan allows for development within that fault line. In addition, management plan also for the Centennial Site for the 100-foot setback within the 100-year floodplain of Wolf Creek. And lastly, a management plan to allow development within areas of slopes exceeding 30% on both the Brunswick site and the Centennial Site. And then finally, the project includes either a voluntary merger or a boundary line adjustment to relocate property lines or remove property lines on the Brunswick site. As proposed, there are a number of buildings which would cross property lines, so the applicant is electing to either remove those property lines with a voluntary merger or reconfigure them with a boundary line adjustment. The project does include a number of technical studies, so just to highlight a few, we've received a noise and vibration and blasting analysis for the proposed project, as well as a number of geotechnical and engineering reports for both the Brunswick site and the Centennial Site. The applicant has also submitted a number of biological reports and management plans as required by Nevada County Land Use and Development Code to analyze potential biological impacts for the proposed project. In addition, the applicant has also submitted an air quality and greenhouse gas analysis, which evaluates and reports on proposed air quality impacts. And then the applicant's also done an aesthetics analysis, which will show potential visual impacts of the proposed project above ground. In addition, the applicant has also submitted a number of other technical studies. Next slide, please, Brad. To include a land use technical study. This technical study evaluates the Nevada County General Plan and Nevada County Land Use and Development Code for consistency with those two required, or those two codes in the general plan. In addition, the applicant has also done a traffic impact analysis, which is required to be submitted and will evaluate proposed traffic impacts of the project. And then lately, the applicant has submitted a phase 1 and phase 2 environmental site assessment of the Brunswick site to analyze existing potential contamination or anything that has been the soil contamination on the site, which will be used to inform the hazards analysis of the environmental impact report. And next slide. So now I'd like to turn it over to Cindy Ganos with Rainy Planning and Management.
Thank you, Matt. I will give a brief overview of the project description. A detailed description is available on the county's website. The proposed project would reinitiate underground mining and gold mineralization processing for the mine over an 80-year period. The components of the project include dewatering, underground mine workings, above ground facilities and operations, industrial pad development, potable water pipeline, and reclamation. I'll briefly discuss each of these components. Currently, groundwater has filled the underground mine workings and will need to be removed prior to mining. The existing Brunswick shaft will be used to access the underground workings for dewatering using pumps. The groundwater would be pumped through a new pipeline to an existing clay-lined pond on site. The pond would be used for storage and removal of solids. Water would then be pumped to a proposed water treatment plant to filter and remove the remaining iron and manganese. The treated water would be pumped through a new pipeline to a new outfall into South Fork Wolf Creek. This initial dewatering is expected to take approximately 6 months. During ongoing mining operations, groundwater would continue to infiltrate and require pumping, although at a lesser rate initially. Next slide. Exploration and mining would begin once dewatering is complete and would occur on a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week basis. Exploration would include diamond core drilling throughout the mine area, producing core samples that would be brought to the surface for analysis. To access the gold mineralization, tunnels would be constructed. The tunnels would be in the non-mineralized rock by blasting and moving the broken rock to the surface. The tunnels would be supported by rock bolts and screens. The new tunnels would be created as necessary to access gold quartz veins or provide underground infrastructure for transporting the rock, as well as providing ventilation and escape routes. These new underground workings would be below 500 feet of the ground surface. Gold mineralization production is through tunneling and long hole blasting, with rock also transported to the surface. The mineral processing on the surface will result in sand tailing that will get mixed with cement and water and pumped back into the mine to fill voids to ensure stability. About 50% of the tailings are used for this purpose, and the remaining would be used as engineered fill. Next slide. The project includes several above-ground improvements to the existing Brunswick shaft. Above-ground facilities will also be necessary to pump fresh air underground. A hoist and head frame would be constructed over the existing concrete silo of the Brunswick shaft to transport supplies, rock, and employees. This head frame would be about 165 feet high. The existing rock silo on site will be reused with a chute and conveyor system to transport rock from the silo. Another system would transport gold mineralization from the silo to the processing plant. A new mine shaft would be developed to serve as a service shaft and would be equipped with a hoist and head frame that is approximately 80 feet high to provide movement of workers and materials, fresh air, and other services such as compressed air, electricity, and pipes. As gold-bearing material is transported from the Brunswick silo using the chutes and conveyors, it is transferred to a processing plant. The processing plant would remove gold from the mineralized rock. Approximately 20 tons of gold concentrate would be produced and bagged on site each day. The processing plant would use reagents such as collectors, promoters, frothers, and flocculants. Mercury and cyanide would not be used. The site would also contain an office, warehouse, change rooms, and other support structures. In total, about 126,000 square feet of buildings would be constructed on the 15-acre portion of the Brunswick site, with 217 parking spaces. As noted previously, the sand tailings would be 50% used to backfill the mine, with the other 50% as engineered fill. The rock and engineered fill generated as a result of the mining would be transported from the Brunswick site to the Brunswick Industrial Site, Centennial Site, or off-site construction areas. Transportation to the Centennial Site could occur 16 hours a day, 7 days a week over approximately 5 years. The Brunswick Industrial Site would last approximately 6 years. Engineered fill would be hauled to either the Centennial Site or offsite construction sites, as well as the gold mining concentrate, using State Route 49. Other trucks providing materials and supplies to the site would use either 49 or 174. The access for hauling engineered fill would be along the west end of Whispering Pines Lane. Next slide. The Brunswick site would be filled to enable 21 acres for future industrial development. The Centennial Site would be filled, resulting in 37 acres of developable land. I'd like to point out that the existing site remediation being processed by the Department of Toxics and Substance Control is separate from the proposed project, and fill would not be placed on the Centennial Site until the Department of Toxic Substance Control determines that remediation is complete. Next slide. The proposed project would also include a buried potable water pipeline to provide water to residents along a portion of East Bennett Road from the Nevada irrigation districts. Residents on several side streets would be offered the opportunity to connect to the existing water line. Next slide. Upon completion of the underground mining, access to underground workings would be closed. Upon completion of the above ground gold processing, the Brunswick site would also be reclaimed as open space and industrial uses. A majority of the above ground facilities and structures would remain to support future post-mining industrial uses. That's a very brief overview of the project. Remember, the detailed project description is on the county website, and I'm going to turn it over to Nick Papani to explain the CEQA process.
Thank you very much, Cindy. I'm going to start by covering a bit of the CEQA process to give an idea and an understanding of where we're at currently, because the CEQA process will continue on for some period of time. So right now, we are at the scoping meeting portion of the CEQA process. And so this is, again, the opportunity to collect comments on the scope or range of issues that will be studied within the draft environmental impact report. So as you can see in the flow chart here, this really is in the beginning of the CEQA process. From this point, what we will do is collect all of the comments on the scope of issues that agencies and public believe should be studied within the environmental document. And we will evaluate those comments and we will address them insofar as they're related to environmental impact issues. We have identified a subset of issues that we are studying, and any additional comments from the agencies or public that also warrant consideration will be accounted for. So we will begin after this the preparation of detailed technical studies, some of which have already been prepared. We will enter a preparation process of the draft EIR. Once the draft EIR is prepared, you can see on the slide here, there is a public review period. So we anticipate that the draft EIR will be issued sometime in late fall 2020, just to give a tentative time frame on the schedule. Once the draft EIR goes out, it will be available for a minimum 45-day public review period. And that will give the public an opportunity to review the draft EIR and the technical studies and comment on the draft EIR. Once we get all the comments on the draft EIR from the public, including agencies, we will prepare responses to comments on the comments that pertain to the environmental analysis. And we'll prepare what we call a final EIR, which is essentially a responses to comments document. So the responses to comments document will be made available to the public and agencies for review prior to the Nevada County decision makers taking action on the project. And we anticipate, again, a general tentative timeframe of early 2021 to get to public hearings on the project. Next slide. I want to just go over the list of issues, and I would say key issues. The following list is not meant to be exhaustive for each of the CEQA topical areas, but more so focused on key issues within each topic. So these are arranged by chapters that will be within the draft environmental impact report. So the first chapter will be on aesthetics, and key issues that we will be evaluating within the aesthetics chapter include identification of and evaluation of potential project impacts to scenic vistas, identification of and evaluation of potential project impacts to scenic resources within a state scenic highway, which is in close proximity to the project site. Identification of key public viewpoints of the project site and evaluating whether the project could substantially degrade the visual character or quality of these public viewpoints. And this will be done primarily using visual simulations. The simulations will show the existing views through photographs from these viewpoints, as well as the same views with the project superimposed onto those photographs. So you get a real representation of how visible the project would be from these viewpoints. I would note that the applicant has prepared a series of simulations and doing an independent peer review of those simulations prior to incorporating that into the draft environmental document. And finally, potential effects related to new sources of substantial light or glare. For agricultural resources, that'll be more narrowly focused on the effects related to conversion of forest land to non-forest use. Next slide. Air quality and greenhouse gas emissions. This chapter, in terms of the key issues, again, will focus on impacts resulting from short-term construction and long-term or operational increases of criteria air pollutant emissions of primary concern. The major ones listed there in parentheses. A health risk assessment will also be prepared to evaluate the health risks associated with construction and operation of the project. And that would include haul truck emissions as part of that analysis. And a technical peer review will be provided of the report provided by the applicant team. The EIR will also address energy effects, generally speaking, that is effects related to wasteful, inefficient, or unnecessary consumption of energy resources during project construction or operation. EIR will evaluate biological resources, that is effects on plants, communities, wildlife, and wetlands, including effects on rare, endangered, candidate, sensitive, and other special status species. A series of technical reports have been prepared both on evaluating aquatic resources, wetlands, and other waters, as well as special status plants and special status wildlife. Habitat management plans have also been prepared and consistent with county requirements, and all of these reports will be peer reviewed by one of our independent consultants. Next slide. Cultural and tribal cultural resources. This chapter will focus on the effects of the project to any on-site historical, archaeological, tribal, and/or paleontological resources. The EIR will evaluate geology, soils, and mineral resources. Specifically, the key points that will be evaluated include the presence of nearby faults and potential to cause direct or indirect substantial adverse effects to structures or people. The potential erosion effects related to construction activities, including limited grading on steep slopes exceeding 30%, as mentioned previously by Matt. Potential erosion and sediment mobility effects related to discharging treated water, which again is related to the dewatering of the mine during construction. And that's discharging the treated water to South Fork of Wolf Creek. The chapter will also evaluate potential subsidence and/or collapse effects on near-surface mine features related to dewatering of the mine, as well as general geology and soils concerns such as liquefaction and expansive soils. And Again, technical peer reviews will be provided by an independent third-party expert of all the applicant provided reports related to geology. Hazards and hazardous materials. This chapter will focus on key issues including investigation of historical uses and identification of recognized environmental conditions resulting from past use, evaluation of recent soil and groundwater sampling efforts at the Brunswick industrial site to identify any areas of contamination exceeding regulatory benchmarks, potential effects of subsurface asbestos and underlying rock and related testing done to determine that potential. And as Cindy previously mentioned, this chapter will address the separate soil remediation efforts at the Centennial industrial site that are under the oversight of the Department of Toxic Substances Control. And lastly, potential effects related to the routine use or transport of hazardous materials during operation. The hydrology and water quality chapter will address key issues including potential effects related to substantially altering the existing drainage course of a stream due to the discharge of treated water in South Fork Wolf Creek. The chapter also assessed the downstream water quality effects related to discharge of that treated water from the mine dewatering into South Fork Wolf Creek. It also discussed the proposed on-site water treatment plant that will treat the dewatered groundwater and the California Regional Water Quality Control Board oversight of the treatment plant. We're also focused on potential effects of mine dewatering on domestic water wells in the vicinity, as well as effects of other mining operations on groundwater levels and the potential for reduction of base flow in the nearby creek. The increases in stormwater runoff associated with additional impervious surfaces will be addressed, as well as how the project proposes to address the increased runoff from a drainage design perspective to accommodate those increased flows to ensure no additional effects on adjacent properties from increased runoff. And all the reports provided by the applicant are going to be independently peer reviewed by our third-party experts. The land use chapter will evaluate project consistency with county plans and policies and compatibility with existing surrounding land uses. The noise chapter will focus on impacts related to temporary construction noise and vibration, as well as operational sources, including but not limited to engineered fill placement activities, mineral processing, surface ventilation via fans above ground on a temporary basis before they can be relocated underground, noise from the water treatment plant, backup generators, and blasting efforts. The noise levels that will be estimated will be predicted and compared to the noise levels of the Nevada County noise standards. And the noise reports will be peer reviewed as well by our third party independent expert. Got just a couple more here. Transportation chapter. This chapter will focus on key issues such as potential impacts related to increased traffic on nearby roadways during construction phase. It will address potential inconsistencies with applicable level of service standards at nearby intersections and roadway segments under various study scenarios, such as existing conditions, which would look at the existing traffic on the roadways, as well as cumulative conditions, which looks at not only existing traffic, but project traffic and future traffic associated with other build out that's reasonably foreseeable. And that will, again, those scenarios will look at the without project traffic and the with project traffic. Queue lengths at study intersections will also be evaluated to determine their sufficiency under the various traffic scenarios. And potential effects of project traffic on roadway pavement condition will be evaluated. And this is where the engineered fill haul trucks are expected to travel. The chapter also assessed the adequacy of site distance for select locations along the proposed haul routes. and effects related to vehicle miles traveled. Next slide. Two more here. The Public Services and Utilities chapter that will focus on new demand for public services such as fire, law enforcement, schools, and parks. And I want to point out that the focus here, pursuant to Appendix G of the CEQA guidelines, is whether new or physically altered facilities will be needed, the construction of which could cause significant environmental impacts. So in other words, if a new fire station may be needed or expanded station, the impact isn't the demand for staffing per se or equipment, but whether some facility would need to be built or expanded and could thereby, through that construction of that, have its own physical environmental impacts. So that's the focus of that analysis. And the chapter will secondarily evaluate the new demand for wastewater treatment capacity as a result of the project, water supply demand, and solid waste disposal, and determinations whether upgrades to these systems would be needed to accommodate the project. And lastly, wildfire. This chapter will identify whether the project site is located in a very high fire hazard severity zone or a state responsibility area. It will evaluate the potential for project to substantially impair and adopt an emergency response plan or emergency evacuation plan. And it will identify whether the project requires installation of infrastructure that may exacerbate fire risk. And lastly, though not on the slide here, I'd be remiss if we didn't emphasize that the EIR will, for all issues that we've noted thus far, it will evaluate cumulative impacts. So not just the project's impact, but other reasonably foreseeable development and how those related effects might combine. So cumulative impacts analysis for each topical area, as well as CEQA requires an alternatives analysis. So alternatives will be evaluated within the draft EIR, including the no project alternative, which is required by CEQA. So as we mentioned earlier on, the public comment period for the scoping period ends on August 17th. And so please submit any comments that you have by the August 17th date. And please submit your comments to Matt Kelly, Senior Planner, and the address is listed here. We thank you very much for viewing the scoping meeting and look forward to receiving your comments. Thank you.